1944, May 1st, the American armored effort in Western Europe began under the shadow of a profound technological failure. It was a failure that proved incredibly costly. Decades of isolationism and peacetime budgetary restraints had yielded the M4 Sherman tank. This machine was designed for mass production and speed. It was built upon a flawed doctrine that prioritized deep penetration. This doctrine failed to anticipate direct combat with enemy armor. This proved to be a catastrophic miscalculation on the battlefield. Ordnance Officer Cooper, whose views spanned the entire logistical chain, saw the horrific results daily. He understood that the Sherman was fundamentally a mistake in steel. Compared to German heavy armor, like the Panther and the Tiger, the M4 was grossly inferior. It failed in every critical aspect of armored combat. The Sherman's short-barreled 75mm gun struggled to penetrate German frontal armor. This was true even at close range. Meanwhile, the Panther's high-velocity 75mm gun could engage and destroy the M4. They achieved this at distances exceeding 2,000 yards. German shells, striking the Sherman's relatively thin, flat glacis plate, often penetrated with ease. In contrast, Sherman rounds frequently bounced harmlessly off the sloped armor of the Panther. This technological disparity translated directly into a horrifying casualty rate. It forced the 3rd Armored Division to replace its entire complement of 232 Shermans nearly 6 times over. The decision to field this inferior weapon was heavily influenced by rigid adherence to outdated armored doctrine. This doctrine was championed in part by commanders like Lieutenant General George Patton. Patton favored lighter, faster tanks for maneuver warfare. This doctrinal bias led to the disastrous rejection of the M26 Pershing heavy tank. The Pershing was a superior machine. It boasted 4 inches of glacis armor and a powerful 90mm gun. The delay in deploying the M26 was compounded by an erroneous assumption. The planners believed that tanks would not be required to fight each other directly. This assumption guaranteed disproportionately high losses for American crews. Victory, Cooper realized, rested not on technological parity. It rested entirely on the superhuman efforts of the logistical backbone. The Maintenance Battalion comprised over 1,000 men. These soldiers, along with maintenance crews scattered throughout the armored regiments, formed 61% of the division's personnel. They worked around the clock every single day. They often erected shelter halves over the engine compartments of Shermans. Their job was to repair the temperamental air-cooled radial engines. These engines were prone to fouling spark plugs and breaking down during continuous, high-mileage operations. The stress was immense for the maintenance crews. Battlefield attrition was so severe that Major A.C. Arlington was shocked by the loss reports. He ordered the abandonment of strict regulations regarding cannibalization of parts. Paperwork vanished instantly, replaced only by verbal requests. The desperate need for parts saw soldiers trading essential items like tire tools. They traded these items just to acquire bacon from Navy units. When experienced tank crews were annihilated, ordnance personnel were forced into a new role. They had to train raw replacement recruits with minimal experience. They then sent these new crews into tanks where their predecessors had just died. Could anyone truly adapt to this brutal cycle that only exacerbated the losses? The shock of Normandy was immediate and brutal for the American forces. Allied planning had critically overlooked the defensive capabilities of the hedgerows. This transformed the pastoral French landscape into a lethal maze. For American armor, the dense hedgerow country, known as the bocage, was a death trap. Initial attacks, such as the costly engagement at Villiers-Fossard, instantly revealed the inadequacy of the M4. 31 tanks were destroyed in that single engagement. The German infantry's use of the man-portable Panzerfaust proved devastating in the close-quarters fighting. The difficult, hard chert earth also made digging protective foxholes nearly impossible for the Americans. The grim reality of the technological deficit was driven home at the vehicle collecting point near Arel. Maintenance crews here witnessed the aftermath of German shell penetrations. They saw the shredded armor and the shocking sight of the internal destruction. They saw the horrific cost paid by the crew. The realization that the M4 Sherman was a fragile weapon against the German giants shattered the myth of American armored superiority. Faced with this immediate, critical failure of doctrine and design, American ingenuity was forced into action. The only way to break the deadlock of the hedgerows was through immediate physical innovation. The development of the hedge chopper became the focus of a desperate, around-the-clock fabrication frenzy. This device featured pointed spikes designed to slice through the formidable earthen walls. Welders worked continuously in abandoned garages to meet the demand. They were risking temporary blindness from the arcs just to equip the tanks for the next assault. This frantic effort was overseen by Warrant Officer Douglas. It was a testament to the fact that survival in Normandy required a new approach. It required not superior design from the past, but brutal, hands-on engineering in the present. The technological mistake of the Sherman had to be overcome by sheer grit and improvisation. The strategic deadlock of the hedgerows was finally broken. It was broken by a force so immense it seemed to tear the very fabric of the sky. Following weeks of costly, yard-by-yard attrition, Operation Cobra was launched. This marked the decisive shift from attritional warfare to overwhelming combined arms assault. The air was ripped apart by the largest concentrated bombardment yet seen in the West. 900 B-26s and 1,700 heavy bombers participated. They were accompanied by 90 battalions of field artillery firing in unison. They dropped 14,000 tons of explosives in 3 hours. This shattered the German front line. It transformed the target area into a desolate, cratered moonscape. This cataclysmic air and artillery effort opened the path for the infantry. The ground exploitation, however, required technological synchronicity. The frantic work of the ordnance crews in fabricating the hedge choppers paid off instantly. Where it had taken days to advance mere yards, the newly equipped M4s could now slice through the bocage simultaneously. This negated the German defenses. It initiated the armored breakout at Saint-Lô on July 26. The operational tempo rocketed forward. The 3rd Armored Division moved 17 miles to Coutances in 3 days. This pace demonstrated the new reality of mobile warfare. But the speed of the advance quickly outran the supply lines. The continuous, high-mileage operations placed an immense strain on every single vehicle. Then came the inevitable German counterpunch. The German High Command, in a desperate gamble to reverse the situation, committed their last reserves. They launched the Mortain counterattack starting on August 6th. Though the M4s were once again vulnerable on open ground, the combined Allied firepower halted the thrust. This failure to break through sealed the fate of the German 7th and 5th Panzer armies. It drove them into the ever-tightening noose of the Falaise pocket. As the division surged forward, the logistical system began to groan under the stress. This stress exposed profound cultural fault lines among the Allied forces. Ordnance Officer Cooper constantly coordinated the recovery and repair of shattered tanks. He found himself in a fierce, escalating argument with British maintenance crews. The American system operated under the relentless, 24-hour pressure of combat. They demanded that repairs be done immediately, regardless of the hour. The British crews, however, adhered rigidly to established work schedules. They insisted upon their sacrosanct tea breaks. The sight of men sitting down for tea while critically damaged Shermans waited for welding enraged Cooper. He argued that every hour of delay cost American lives on the front lines. The British crews, however, saw the Americans' non-stop pace as reckless and disorderly. They prioritized tradition and scheduled routines over the relentless urgency that defined the American logistical effort. The armored advance became a relentless race, despite the internal friction. The 3rd Armored Division had shattered the German left flank. They moved with breathtaking speed. Pushing past Charleroi, the division secured vital bridges over the Meuse River at Namur and Huy. This rapid advance isolated massive pockets of German resistance. The most significant operational success came at the Battle of Mons. Allied forces established roadblocks around the city. This effectively cut off the primary escape route for German units retreating from northern France. The Allies were outnumbered by what was estimated to be over 100,000 desperate German soldiers. The maneuver trapped tens of thousands of prisoners. This dealt a crippling blow to the enemy's ability to reconstitute its forces. The exhilaration of the pursuit faded quickly. The division was now closing on the German border. The terrain tightened and German resistance stiffened. This culminated in the costly assault on Liege. Liege was a city fiercely defended by heavily fortified underground concrete structures. Once Liege fell, the 3rd Armored Division faced the Siegfried Line. This was a massive, layered barrier of fixed fortifications that stretched for miles. These defenses were truly formidable. They included pillboxes with concrete walls ranging from 3 to 6 feet thick. There were continuous lines of reinforced dragon's teeth designed to impede tanks. The German defenses also utilized extensive zigzag trenches. On September 12, the first critical milestone was reached. Lieutenant Colonel Lovelady's task force crossed the border and entered Rotgen. This was the first German town to be taken and held by an enemy since Napoleon, but the initial penetration was immediately costly. The following day, Task Force X initiated the assault on the outer defenses. Crews employed brutal, improvised methods to breach the line. They hooked bulldozer blades onto Shermans to rip through the dragon's teeth. By nightfall, the grim tally stood at 18 M4 tanks. These tanks were either knocked out or burned during the initial penetration. The war had suddenly transitioned from the fluid, open maneuver of France. It became a grinding, brutal battle of attrition against concrete and steel. The division was severely overextended. It was critically short on gasoline, ammunition, and maps. Maintenance crews were forced to work around the clock in blackout conditions. They often struggled in the pouring rain and deep mud. This hardship fostered a deep mutual respect between the combat troops and the logistical backbone. Their survival utterly depended on this logistical effort. The initial penetration of the Siegfried Line in September proved only a momentary victory. The subsequent weeks devolved into a costly, grinding, attritional struggle. This culminated in the major November offensive. The battlefield was now a complete quagmire. Constant rain had saturated the ground, turning the chalky earth into thick, clinging mud. This mud crippled the mobility of the narrow-tracked M4 Shermans. The treacherous terrain negated the tank's already questionable offensive power. On November 16th, a massive combined arms assault began. It was designed to achieve the breakthrough that had eluded the Allies for 2 months. Combat Command B of the 3rd Armored was tasked with penetrating the minefields around Hill 287. This role was far outside the standard armored doctrine. It was forced upon them by the perceived inadequacy of other units. The results of the assault were catastrophic. Engineers attempted to clear the path, infiltrating under enemy fire. The flail tanks, designed to detonate mines, quickly became mired in the deep mud. They transformed into immobile targets for German anti-tank guns. A tragic domino effect immediately ensued. Shermans attempting to bypass the disabled recovery vehicles struck their own mines. The ground was so saturated that the mud acted like a huge suction cup. It immobilized the tanks even when they used field modifications like grousers and duck feet. The tankers were left as sitting ducks for murderous German fire. Crews attempting to bail out were met with concentrated automatic weapons fire. The fighting for villages like Hasenrath saw incredible, almost superhuman acts of courage. Despite this bravery, the systemic failure was undeniable. The division was taking horrendous losses. This failure to break through in November cemented a specific belief among the combat troops. They believed the war was being unnecessarily prolonged by a technological deficit. Tankers had watched their comrades slaughtered in M4s. They knew the truth. The offensive would have succeeded had the M26 Pershing heavy tank been available. A powerful hypothetical statement hung over the entire command structure. The deployment of the M26 could have shortened the war by 5 months. It could have averted hundreds of thousands of casualties. Crucially, it could have prevented the strategic disaster that was about to unfold. Before the Allied command could fully process the tactical failure of November, the German army delivered a stunning, massive counterblow. On December 16th, the Ardennes offensive, known as the Battle of the Bulge, slammed across a 60-mile front. The Germans exploited a sector thinly held by only 3 American divisions. The element of surprise was total. German infiltration and deception tactics were immediately effective. SS troops wore American uniforms and drove captured jeeps. This plunged headquarters into confusion and paranoia. The rumors flew, and tension was incredibly high. Security required elaborate password and parole interrogations. Justice was swift and final for any captured infiltrator. The weather instantly became the battlefield's primary enemy. Freezing rain, ice, heavy fog, and sleet turned the terrain into a nightmare. The German breakthrough quickly drove a deep salient. This forced American units into a desperate scramble. The severely understrength 3rd Armored Division was among them. The division's Combat Command B was ordered south toward the Stavelot area. The journey itself was a logistical horror show. The convoy of 1,200 vehicles moved bumper to bumper on treacherous, icy roads. They were guided only by near-invisible blackout lights. The stop-and-start chaos led to constant wrecks. Between 150 and 200 breakdowns were typical during a 50-mile night march. The stakes were impossibly high. The 6th SS Panzer Army's primary objective was the vast gasoline dump near Stavelot. This dump held 3 million gallons of fuel vital for their advance to Antwerp. Denying this resource became the singular focus of the American defense. The dump itself was a chaotic scene of concentrated logistical effort. Hundreds of GMC trucks were ferrying 5-gallon cans. 10-ton trailers were moving 55-gallon drums under accelerated German artillery fire. Small, desperate detachments of rear echelon troops suddenly became the front line. These included engineers, ordnance, and anti-aircraft personnel. A young engineer construction lieutenant established a fortified roadblock. He utilized a single 90mm anti-aircraft gun and a machine gun. This single roadblock proved crucial in slowing the German infiltration. The subsequent engagement with Kampfgruppe Piper and the 1st SS Panzer Division became the decisive armored clash of the northern flank. This fighting took place along the Stavelot-La Glaise line. The M4 Shermans were technologically outmatched by the Panther and King Tiger tanks. Yet the American advantage in maneuver and logistics held firm. In one dramatic duel, an M12 gun carriage, a self-propelled artillery piece, faced a King Tiger. A near-miraculous shot struck the base of the Tiger's gun mantlet. It blew off the massive tank's turret. This was a sharp reminder that fortune still played a hand in the face of technological inferiority. Task Force Hogan found itself cut off and surrounded. They defiantly refused to surrender their position. Before evacuating under darkness, Hogan's men ingeniously destroyed their equipment. They poured sugar into the gas tanks of their vehicles. This action tied up significant enemy forces and prevented the exploitation of the German gains. The failure to capture the Stavelot gasoline dump was critical. This, combined with the successful defense orchestrated by the 3rd Armored Division, effectively crippled the German offensive's main thrust toward Antwerp. The winter campaign exacted a brutal physical toll on the soldiers. The biting cold was constant, freezing tools to the skin. It turned roads into lethal sheets of ice where tanks slid like massive sleds. Early combat boots were utterly inadequate for the harsh conditions. This led to widespread frostbite and the debilitating condition known as trench foot. Feet became swollen, numb, and agonizingly painful, incapacitating countless men. Soldiers often stood for hours in water-filled foxholes. They struggled constantly against circulation problems in the frozen mud. To cope with the relentless strain and the pathological boredom, soldiers focused intensely on long-range possibilities. They conjured pleasant memories, supported by personal rituals. This was a necessary mechanism for both physical and emotional survival. The battle was fought not just against the enemy, but against the brutal elements themselves. Yet, as the Allies shifted from defense to counterattack, a crucial technological equalizer was introduced. This equalizer was the revolutionary proximity fuse. This battery-powered radar system was one of World War II's best-kept secrets. It detonated artillery shells at a desired height above the ground. On January 3rd, a massive barrage utilizing these fuses created panic and confusion among the entrenched German troops. The shells decimated infantry caught in the open and significantly aided the Allied advance. However, the counteroffensive was plagued by the persistent, tragic cost of systemic failure. The high attrition rate meant that critical shortages of experienced tank crews persisted throughout the fighting. On January 8th, the price of this deficiency was paid in blood. 15 M4 medium tanks and their crews were issued to replacements. These crews were comprised of men with dangerously limited combat experience. Some of the men had arrived from overseas only hours before. These hastily trained soldiers were immediately thrown into the line. There they faced devastating German defenses and concealed armor. The 3rd Armored Division alone lost 125 M4 medium tanks and 38 M5 light tanks between December 16th and January 20th. The sight of these inexperienced crews being systematically destroyed in their inferior tanks was a profound tragedy. It challenged the notion that simply assigning men to tasks was sufficient for success in complex and lethal operations. The immense casualty figures underscored the brutal intensity of the bulge. 82,000 Americans and 100,000 Germans were killed, wounded, or missing. This was a battle that could have been avoided entirely. This avoidance was possible had the Allied High Command not underestimated the need for qualitative superiority in the armored fist they sent against the Reich. The grinding, costly penetration of the Siegfried Line, culminating in the horrific attrition of the Ardennes, finally forced a radical and overdue technological reckoning. The Allied High Command could no longer ignore the staggering qualitative deficiency of the M4 Sherman. This deficiency was particularly glaring when facing the meticulously prepared German defenses of the Ruhr River Line. This line was the result of a 2-month effort. It featured zigzag trenches, minefields, and overlapping fields of fire. These defenses were specifically designed to negate the mobility of the narrow-tracked American armor. The response to this crisis was twofold. The first part was an urgent field modification program. The second was the belated deployment of the superior M26 Pershing heavy tank. Major Arrington, the ordnance officer's superior, took the lead in the modification effort. He tasked the maintenance crews with creating a true heavy tank from the components available. The result of this effort was the experimental Super Pershing. Using boilerplate and even salvaged German Panther faceplate, 5 to 7 tons of additional armor were welded onto the front of the chassis. This modification transformed the tank's silhouette into that of a raging, charging bull elephant. Critically, this monster was fitted with the experimental 90mm T-15E1 high-velocity gun. This gun boasted a muzzle velocity of 3,850 feet per second. It finally exceeded the firepower of the dreaded German 88mm Hawkeye 43 gun. This new weapon was capable of punching through 4 inches of armor. It could penetrate the 5-inch final drive differential shaft. It was even capable of destroying the crankshaft of a Maybach engine. The standard M26 Pershing, a machine long overdue, began arriving in significant numbers. Its necessity was immediately validated in combat. Near Blatzheim, a brand-new M26, part of Task Force Lovelady, surprised a German counterattack force. This force was comprised of 4 King Tigers and 2 Mark IV tanks. At a range of 1,000 yards, the M26 utilized its superior gun. It successfully destroyed 2 Tigers and 1 Mark IV. The Germans were utterly unprepared for an American tank that could match their heavy armor at such a distance. They were immediately repulsed. This engagement marked one of the first critical combat victories for the Pershing. It validated the painful lessons learned through thousands of lost Shermans. With the technological balance finally shifting, the push into the German heartland intensified. The offensive in the Rhineland commenced in late February 1945. It aimed at crippling German industrial capacity. On March 3rd, the 3rd Armored Division launched an all-out assault on Cologne. Cologne was a city of 800,000 people, already reduced to rubble by aerial bombing. The fighting in the city was fierce and intimate. Narrow city streets presented the greatest danger to tanks. The tanks were vulnerable to attacks on their lightly armored top decks. These attacks came from snipers, utilizing Molotov cocktails and Panzerfausts. The snipers were concealed within the skeletal walls of burned-out buildings. The Super Pershing, however, proved its mettle in this urban labyrinth. It notably engaged in a climactic armored duel in front of the scarred Cologne Cathedral against a German Panther. Its powerful 90mm gun inflicted devastating damage on the German tank. The capture of Cologne on March 7th, a major industrial and transportation hub, was a decisive victory. Yet it was immediately overshadowed by a strategic shockwave felt across the entire Western Front. On the same day, Combat Command B of the 9th Armored Division was advancing unexpectedly fast. It captured the Ludendorff Bridge at Remagen completely intact. This stunning success bypassed the need for costly, time-consuming amphibious assaults across the Rhine River. It dramatically accelerated the Allied advance into central Germany. The capture of the Remagen bridgehead provided the crucial leverage for the deep penetration strategy championed by General Eisenhower. Ignoring Field Marshal Montgomery's insistence on a narrow northern thrust, Eisenhower granted the 12th Army Group equal priority. This decision was cemented when General Patton's Third Army unexpectedly crossed the Rhine at Oppenheim on March 23. This action effectively stole the thunder of Montgomery's planned massive assault. The strategy was now a rapid armored thrust designed to envelop the crucial Ruhr pocket. On March 25, 7th Corps, spearheaded by the 3rd Armored Division, launched its assault from the Remagen bridgehead. The division, living up to its moniker, Hell on Wheels, set a record-breaking pace. It covered 90 miles north in a single 24-hour period. But the speed of the advance could not overcome the persistent technological disparities. South of Paderborn, a task force comprised largely of the remaining M4 Shermans was annihilated by German Tiger tanks. This task force consisted of 17 tanks along with 17 half-tracks. The Sherman's 76mm guns were capable only of damaging a Tiger's engine compartment. Meanwhile, their own frontal armor was hopelessly outmatched by the German guns. The burning hulks and the shock of the crews facing superior German armor again underscored a critical fact. The bulk of the American armored force was still fighting a modern war with an obsolete weapon. The relentless, high-speed offensive also brought profound tragedy. Major General Maurice Rose, the commander of the 3rd Armored Division, was killed in action. He was the only American division commander to suffer such a fate in the European theater. His death was a moment of confusion and profound shock. Amidst the chaos of the rapid advance, the loss stunned the entire division. Only hours earlier, Rose had personally presented the ordnance officer with a Bronze Star. This was an ironic juxtaposition to the general's final, abrupt moments on the front line. Despite the losses, the strategic maneuver was devastatingly effective. By April 1st, Task Force Kane met the 2nd Armored Division at Lippstadt. This action effectively closed the massive Ruhr pocket. This encirclement led to the capture of 380,000 German prisoners. It was the largest single group of prisoners of war ever taken. This event shattered the German army in the West. It ensured that the war, though still brutal, was irrevocably nearing its conclusion. The meeting of American armored columns at Lippstadt on April 1, 1945, was the definitive act. It sealed the fate of the German army in the West. Task Force Kane, driving relentlessly, linked up with the 2nd Armored Division. They created the final impenetrable cordon around the Ruhr pocket. This single maneuver trapped over 380,000 German soldiers. It remains the largest mass surrender of the war. Field Marshal Model, the commander of Army Group B, refused to surrender. His forces had been annihilated within the pocket. Model adhered to the rigid Prussian tradition of never capitulating. Bound by this code and ignoring Hitler's desperate orders, Model took his own life. His suicide was a final, grim testament to the collapse of the German military machine. With the Ruhr destroyed, the strategic focus shifted eastward. The 3rd Armored Division had advanced approximately 300 miles in continuous combat since crossing the Remagen bridgehead. They were completely exhausted and running on fumes. Supply shortages were critical across the board. The division suffered from a severe lack of 50-weight engine oil. Maintenance crews were forced to ration supplies. They neglected air cleaners just to keep the tanks running. The advance continued towards the Elbe River. By April 26th, the division was relieved by the 9th Infantry Division. The strategic decision had been finalized. Berlin would be a Russian objective, not an American one. The division ceased its efforts to bridge the Elbe. It turned its attention instead to consolidating its recent gains. As the advance slowed, the soldiers were confronted with a reality far more terrifying than the battlefield. On April 11th, near Nordhausen, Major Dick Johnson alerted the ordnance officer to a scene of unimaginable atrocity. They entered the Nordhausen concentration camp. This was a place where the systematic starvation and extermination of slave laborers had taken place. The stench of death was overwhelming. The sight of emaciated survivors, described as living ghosts, shattered the psychological defenses of the hardened troops. Vast piles of dead bodies, estimated at 3,000, lay interred. Their arrangement exposed the full horrific depths of Nazi barbarity. The victims were reduced to skin and bones. Their bodies stood as mute evidence of calculated cruelty. The grim task of burial commenced immediately. German prisoners were forced to carry the lifeless forms. They were made to confront the ultimate physical manifestation of their nation's crimes. This moral horror was starkly juxtaposed with the discovery of the Reich's most sophisticated technological secrets. Nordhausen was not only a death camp, but also the manufacturing and supply center for the V-2 rocket program. Allied forces discovered an elaborate underground factory there. Tunnels extended 2 miles and 600 feet below the surface. This depth made the facility impervious to Allied bombing. 50 railroad cars loaded with V-2 rockets and assemblies were captured. This discovery, along with advanced Me-109s, FW-190s, and Ju-88s found at the Dessau airport, provided invaluable intelligence. This intelligence would dramatically shape the post-war world. Colonel John Medeiros, 1st Army's Chief of Ordnance, organized the effort to collect this captured technology. The German rocket scientists, led by Dr. Werner von Braun, surrendered to the Americans. Their expertise contributed directly to the United States ballistic missile programs. This laid the very foundation for the coming space race. Despite these breakthroughs and the overwhelming material superiority that eventually secured victory, the war's ultimate legacy remained tied to the shortcomings of American armored technology. The M4 Sherman, for all its mass production, was ultimately a technological failure. This failure cost thousands of lives. The sheer scale of American industrial output was undeniable. An iconic image of the time was the celebration of the 60,000th tank produced. Yet this quantitative might could not overcome the qualitative flaws of the Sherman without immense human sacrifice. The German Panther could engage the M4 head-on at 2,000 yards. Meanwhile, the Sherman had to close to 600 yards and pray for a flank shot. Shell fragments penetrating the M4's hull often detonated the ammunition stored in the sponsons. This instantly turned the tank into an inferno. The long-term historical correction, driven by the testimony of those who fought and survived, was clear. The American victory in the West was achieved not through technological parity. It was achieved through the exceptional resilience of its personnel. It was also due to the extraordinary efforts of the ordnance maintenance and supply system. This logistical backbone compensated for the M4 Sherman's inferiority. It sustained the advance despite the tank's vulnerability and high attrition rate. The failure to deploy the M26 Pershing earlier was a decision rooted in arrogance and flawed doctrine. This failure contributed to higher American casualties and prolonged the war. The ordnance officer had witnessed the continuous, high-speed destruction and replacement of every tank in the division multiple times over. He understood that the critical, unacknowledged role of logistics and human endurance was the true source of victory. The war ended not with a technological flourish, it ended with the profound, overwhelming relief of men who had survived a conflict. By all rights, that conflict should have ended months sooner had their main assault weapon been equal to the enemy's. If you value these historical accounts, please subscribe to the channel and like this video. It helps us preserve these vital stories. And please, share your own memories or thoughts in the comments below.